Okay, so we got back-to-back sessions here, so I'm ready to start. So my name is Sharon Goza, and I'm here to talk about bringing International Space Station science down to Earth. So a little bit about me. I've worked at NASA for a long time, probably longer than I care to admit. But when I started in computer graphics, the computer graphics was at its infancy. We had the top-of-the-line machine. It had 2,000 polygons per second and 8 megabytes of memory. So there were no game engines, and there was no animation, no modeling software. We had to write our own, and that's how I started out. So to give you a little bit of history about International Space Station, the first module was Russian Zarya, which was launched in 1998, and it was pretty much propulsion and power only. But since then, the station has been continuously occupied since November of 2000. And the early flights that were assembly focused, but only had a little bit of science. The station assembly was completed in 2011, and science is now its main focus. Currently, there have over 1,100 experiments have been conducted by NASA, CSA, ESA, JAXA, and Roscosmos. And we have a real need to make the experiment data that has gone on International Space Station available to the researchers, industry, educators, and the general public. So we had the task of doing this, and we looked at the data and saw what was there, found out that experiments are separated into 6 main categories, and then each category had 5 to 21 subcategories. And the information was, the database is huge. It's got, every experiment has a synopsis, a technical summary. They have applications, investigators, expeditions, agencies, objectives, links, images, publications, and several more categories. We also have the facilities on the International Space Station that we needed to convey to the public. You know, where could they conduct their experiments? What was available? Another big thing for us is what benefit is the space station? What experiments have benefited humanity, and how can we tell the people what we've done? There are also on the web a ton of links to videos and documents, but they're kind of all scattered, and a lot of them are buried. As you can see from the picture, the stuff does exist on the web, but it's text and it's lists, and other than, you can Control F and search through it, but you can't get any correlation. And they do make documents as well. So we wanted to get this and bring it to the public. So the problems that needed to be solved was, how could we convey the volume of experiments done in the International Space Station? We wanted to be able to show people graphically, what could you see? How many have we done? As opposed to making them look at a list of names and titles and acronyms, as are very popular with NASA. And then how could we see the progression of the experiment volume throughout the operating years in the ISS? So knowing that we did 6 categories of experiments, one of the big things for researchers and scientists is getting their experiment on the International Space Station. So there's limited capacity, and one of the things that will make one experiment more marketable than another to get it on the ISS is the fact that it hasn't been done before. So if you look at those categories, and a researcher could see, well, material science, there's been a ton of material science experiments done in the last 3 years. Maybe I should look at something a little bit different. And this is definitely important for educational institutions that are putting up small payloads. Also, we needed to communicate this to the general public, to scientists, and to researchers, and we needed to do it with the same application. We didn't have the time, we didn't have the budget to write an application for researchers, an application for educators, and an application for the general public. So we sat down and we did a little bit of agile stuff and came up with some stories and made goals out of those. Goal was easy to use. For experiments, we wanted to graphically depict the experiments, the categories and the subcategories. We wanted to visually show changes by expedition and sponsor. And we wanted to provide a search capability within the experiments by keywords. For the facilities, we wanted to show the facility, as well as provide the text description of the facility and a common interface into the experiment data. So if the facility was running a specific experiment, we wanted to show the same page that we would show when you were looking through the experiments. We wanted to incorporate the other media found on ISS Science web pages, make all of it easily expandable. Of course, there's more and more experiments being done. We expect them to expand the categories. We expect them to expand what they want in the data set. We also wanted to be able to separate pieces for uses in different venues. So one of the criteria we had was we have the Space Center Houston Museum, and they wanted to use a portion of this. They're like, well, people aren't going to want to read a bunch of texts and experiments, but it's really neat if we could get them to look at what the facilities are. So we needed to be able to make this so that you could pull out pieces of it and use one piece in one place, one piece in another place, and put it all together and make it available to the public. One of the other things that was really big on my team was to limit the number of clicks. The last thing somebody wants to do is go down about 10 levels before they finally get to the information that they want to see. So we said our goal was 3. That's the depth that we wanted. Because of the way the database is, we could not dynamically update the database. The database doesn't exist on a public website or a website that we could read from. So we have to actually pull the data and then do some processing, get the data into the app before we can put out another version of the app. So we wanted that process to be done within less than a week. And then we wanted to do all this on multiple platforms with minimal additional work. So we looked at our past experience. Of course, because of when I started and when our team started, we had tens of thousands of lines of custom code. We could do modeling and animation and simulation with all that code. And we had a limited amount of experience with Unity because we had a NASA Connect Xbox outreach project. However, our Unity experience wasn't expansive enough to sit there and say, we could just go right out and write this application. But after a lot of deliberation, we said, Unity is it. There's no other way for us to keep up with this, the technology. We have a small team of 6 people, and to write all this with our custom code is just not going to work, especially since we'd never written anything for iOS and we'd never written anything for Android. So we picked Unity. We figured we could capitalize on our skills developed for the previous simulations and outreach games because we knew how to code, we knew how to do artwork, and we had a lot of assets from our simulation and games that we had done previously, so we just wrote a converter from our proprietary format and into FBX so we could use those in Unity as well. We looked at Unity and said, scenes are perfect. We can use scenes like people use scenes in a game to separate our application into the different sections, turn the scenes off, not use them, put it in a different venue, turn the scene on, and we got a different application. So scenes were a lifesaver for some of our code. And also the cross-platform capability to expand our reach and our usage. The 3D graphics we used in Unity to provide a more immersive environment instead of just having flat images. We have 3-dimensional models that you can rotate and zoom and dig down into. And then we created the graphical interface to convey the pieces of information simultaneously. So for our main scene, we made a spinner, which allowed infinite expansion and contraction. So we show 3 options on the menu, but there could be 10 behind it. Didn't matter. All we had to do was change the number of elements in our array and just make sure our spin was set to what it needed to be. For the experiment scene, we graphically depicted the experiments, the categories, and the subcategories, and visually show the changes by expedition and sponsor. So we have a spinner up in the upper right-hand corner, one for expedition and one for sponsor. As you move that spinner, and you'll see a little video later on, the experiments around the center of the 6 balls grow and change. So each stem is how long the experiment has been run on the station. Some have been run for years. And then each ball itself is the experiment that's being run during that expedition by that sponsor. So a researcher could go and say, okay, you know, how many have been done by NASA, because the United States one go through NASA. So how many have been done by NASA? How many have been done on this category? Looks like too much in there, so maybe we should look at a different category. So we also provide search capability within the experiments by the keywords, and we used for our interface a mix of NGUI and then custom scripts. The experiment page scripts, we kept common to all the scenes. So the experiment page you see on the right that shows all of our text, when you go to the facilities and you go to an experiment, it pulls up the exact same page. So all that code was reused in there. We didn't have to rewrite it. It was very simple to keep common across there. We used an SQL database inside the code, and we made the text scrollable and scalable so that it could be used on all the different form factors and platforms. For our facilities, we show the facility as well as provide a text description. And for this, we reused a lot of the assets for the outreach game. If you look on the right-hand side, you see the inside of the Destiny module. And all of the models that we used in 3D and those were used for our Connect Xbox experiences. On the left, you see an ELC. It's an experiment platform. And those we use in our animations when we do science animations as well. So we have a lot of reusability of our assets. Plus, we provided that common interface into the experiment data. As you see on the bottom of the SIR rack, you can click that flex button and it'll bring up that exact same page as if you went to the flex and from the experiment section. And this also allowed us to have some interactive portion for the users to interact with the elements. You can spin the ELC around, the labels change. You can touch a label, it'll zoom it in for you. On the right, you can slide the racks back and forth, tap the racks, flip yourself up and over and around, and just a nice way to explore. For links in multimedia, it was just a pretty simple list. We incorporated other media found on the ISS Science web pages. We consolidated that information into one place and made it so that it was easily expandable. Now, we used an in-app web browser asset after talking to a lot of our stakeholders who they really didn't want to be in the app, click a link, pop them out of the app, and then they had to get rid of their web browser, and then they had to go back in the app. So we used UniWebView for that. We do have an option so you can go to your native web browser if you want to, but most people seem to use the UniWebView. For the benefits section, we capitalized on that spinner again, and so we have categories of different benefits, and these categories expand and contract just by adding and subtracting elements from an array. The information pages that we have for each of the benefits are also easily expandable. You can slide them back and forth. You can add another page for a different description, for a different benefit to humanity. So the result was the Space Station Research Explorer, and it is available on iTunes and Google Play. And it's also the same application that's being used on station for the ISS crew iPads. So I talked a little faster than I wanted to. So I'm done a lot early, sorry. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you. We do also do, we have an education outreach game called Space Science Investigations Plant Growth. It is aimed for 8th graders. It takes you through the procedures to set up the plant growth veggie experiment, and then you get to grow a salad for astronauts in space, kind of a little RPG with tasks and stuff. So you can also check that out. Any questions? Okay. Yeah. Yes?
Looking at the content, I was wondering if you guys were exploring expanding to AR, VR content in the future.
So in this application, we're not, especially with the venues that it's used into, but one of our future games that we're coming out with for education and outreach is a mobile VR, Explore the Station. So.
One interesting way you can improve the application. Have you ever heard of the space simulator? It was designed by not a NASA scientist, but another space scientist. He has all kinds of theoretical and planet information that you can add on to and then access. So it's not only just the ISS, but also further out, like the Hubble Space Telescope, that kind of, either for this application or another, for deeper space.
Yeah. So our general customer is the Space Station Program Office. I do work directly for NASA, but we do have customers within NASA. So our funding customer is the Space Station Office. So this application was meant just for Space Station. We do have others. We've been just going crazy building in Unity since then. But we have one that we just call an Explorer, and it allows you to put any sort of system into the Explorer and then labels and text and that sort of thing, so that would work great for Hubble. Planets are usually JPL's venue, so they usually do all the applications on planets and that sort of thing.
Hey, so you said a lot of nice things about Unity, but I was wondering, what was your biggest pain point or learning curve when working with Unity?
Oh. I think the biggest learning curve was just the simple fact that we weren't writing all the code. So we didn't have control of some of this stuff, and it was like, if we were writing this ourselves, we could just put this in, and it's like, no, we've got to figure out how to get to it, and the forums are great, the people are great to talk to, and there's just so much information out there that we did get over that hump. But that was probably the hardest thing, was just the fact that we didn't have control over, after having control over all the code for all those years.
Was there any particular thing you wanted to have control over, or just kind of that general?
So we were used to a lot of hierarchy control ourselves. Of course, Euler angles and quaternions, and never the twain shall meet. But we just, mostly it was a lot of that, getting used to the way the hierarchy was done versus the way we had done our hierarchy. For the most part now, we're not missing anything that I can think of, with the exception the sim guys are missing floating point. When we're working on planetary scales, when you're going from Earth to the moon, and you're using actual simulations to drive the graphics, it's like, okay, so now we have to get rid of all that precision and try to simulate that precision inside of a game engine. So.
Was accessibility ever a concern during development? If so, how did you navigate around that?
Accessibility in the sense of?
Special needs.
Okay. Yeah. So for this application, we did not take that into account. It's 508 compliance is one of our manifests, but there's also an exception in there, so we fell under that exception, so we didn't. We have looked into, there's an asset store accessibility that came out fairly recently, and have started looking in that for some future work we were going to do, but as you know, it's kind of hard for at least blind access, try to make 3D graphics accessible to the blind. But this application, if if we get a chance to, that's one of the things we want to revisit because the accessibility stuff would be great with it. Yeah. But for this version, no, we didn't. Anybody else? Can you, I can't hear you. Can you get to a microphone? Oh, Space Station Research Explorer. So yeah, we call it SSRE. But it's on iTunes and Google Play, both of them, Space Station. And I have bookmarks and stuff that have all the information on it. If somebody wants them, you can come see me after. So we started our design planning in mid-2013, and our first version came out at the end of 2014. So about a year and a half from start to finish. And we have a team of 6. We have 3 artists, and 3 artists, 2 programmers, and then a project manager.
Hi.
Hi.
In terms of you mentioned you had like SQL databases and obviously a lot of information, a lot of content. Does the app share that content with other interfaces like the web? Is there any kind of common, common sharing of the info, or did you have to sort of like port it over to something unique for this app?
Yeah. So right now, the way things are done, and we are trying to change this, there is what they call the ISS Science Toolbox, which is a totally internal, behind the firewall application that has all this data in it. Then that data is exported, and that export they export it in HTML, and then we take that HTML and we parse it and put it in an SQLite database. And then it makes those web pages that you saw the pictures of. So in that sense, we share the data that the web has, but we have to do a lot of processing to stick it in our app. There is movement towards having that portion of the database constantly updated, kind of a push thing, and then we will rewrite our software to pull from that on a constant basis so we don't have to put out another version every single time the database changes. The data is static in the app. And the nice thing about the fact that it's static in the app is that when the astronaut's on orbit and they want to use it, they don't have to worry about having an internet connection. So that's a nice thing about it, but for the general public and researchers, this data can be changing on a daily basis. So we update every quarter, so the data could be a couple months behind. But that's one of the reasons for that 1-week turnaround time. Anybody else?
I just downloaded the app. It's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to figure out how I could get my tablet. I don't have an iPad, I have an Android tablet, and I didn't have a way to hook it up, so I was going to do a live demo. It didn't work. Anyway. Well, thank you for coming. And like I said, I have bookmarks and stuff if you want information on this app or the game app that's already out, then I can give you that. Thank you.